Okay, so in this last video, what I want to talk about is how do we manage our emotions, right? So we've talked about really what emotions are, why they're so important, because we understand that our emotions are driving our actions, which are giving us the results in our life. So specifically around a goal like weight loss or changing our relationship with food, the more that we can create positive emotions, the more likely we are to take positive actions, which is going to lead us to the positive results, right? But for this, what I want to say is that, part of being a human being is that we're going to experience a wide range of emotions, right? Which is totally great and fine. But most of us don't really know how or aren't really taught how to manage the negative emotions, right? Now, I do want to point out a lot of people say it's not just negative emotions that cause them to overeat or experience emotional eating. Sometimes it's positive emotions, it's excitement or happiness, and they're using food as a way to kind of perpetuate that and celebrate. But most of the time when people talk about it, it's usually that they're trying to sort of avoid a negative emotion and using food as a way to do that. So one of the things I want to talk about is why do we really do that, right? If you really ask yourself, why do I do that? And we'd say, well, I don't know, food it just feels good. It just tastes good, right? And there's some truth to that, right? Usually the foods that we're overeating, it's not like, people don't say like, yeah, I just can't stop eating broccoli and tofu, or grilled chicken and Brussels sprouts. Like most of us would say when we're overeating, or binge eating or emotionally eating, it's going to be like the cookies, the ice cream, the cupcakes, things like that, right? Things that have a lot of sugar, maybe white flour, that are highly processed, right? And so these types of foods give us a burst, basically, of these feel-good chemicals in our brain, these opiates that are released that really feel good. And so if you're experiencing a negative emotion, it makes sense that even if you don't know consciously why you're doing it, that you are going to turn to something that's going to try to kind of elevate your mood. It's going to kind of help to bring things up. It's going to help you avoid or escape that bad feeling. It makes sense that you would do that, especially if we think feeling bad feelings is a really bad thing, right? If our thoughts about feeling bad is really bad, on top of that, then we're going to want to just escape the whole thing, right? And so food is an easy way to do that. It's legal, it's easily accessible, most of the stuff isn't that expensive, so it's just a really easy way to sort of escape the emotion, right? And we have this chemical called dopamine that is released that is super powerful. And really what dopamine is it's a motivating chemical. So when you're watching television and you see somebody eating, a cupcake, dopamine is released a lot of times, and it's like, oh, I need something like that, right? And we get up and we go get a snack, and we're sitting there eating it while we're watching television or whatever. Or if we're experiencing that negative emotion, dopamine is sort of that driving force that's getting us to something that's going to help us to escape from it. So again, I won't get too much into the science, but I really want you to understand, what I want you to get from this is, if you're having those feelings and you're feeling sometimes like you're driven to eat things even when you don't even really want to be eating them, that's the dopamine, and it's very powerful. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you've malfunctioned or that you have an eating addiction or any of those things. Actually, everything's really working the way it's supposed to. It's just that we're living in a time when we have so much of this type of food because the food manufacturers are trying to make money, and they know that this stuff is going to be highly addictive and very hard to kind of get off if we don't understand what's going on. It can actually be pretty easy once you kind of understand everything that's happening, but that's a lot of times what it is. So it makes sense. Now the problem is, this is sort of a false pleasure type thing, which doesn't mean we should never have, a cookie again. Is not what I'm saying. But when we're doing it in a way to try to escape emotion, what you'll probably notice is that you never really feel satiated, right? That's why you can eat way more than you really intended, because it's like we're constantly trying to get more of that, and that dopamine is continuing to drive the desire to get more and more and more. So we're like, I'm just going to have one cookie, and the next thing we know, it's 6 cookies, right? That's because of the false pleasure and that dopamine causing us to just want to get more and more to try to, again, continue to escape the emotion or just to feel better, okay? So this is what's happening. So the question then becomes, what do we do instead? How do we manage or process these emotions instead? So here's what I want to suggest that you try to do, right? Most of us it's all kind of almost happening subconsciously, right? A lot of my clients will describe sort of like eating outside of their own will, right? Like they don't really even want to be doing this, but they just feel sort of driven to do it. So the first thing that you can do, instead of trying to give yourself this rule of like, you know, just don't do it, or just get your act together, or just be better, be the good girl, or trying to start some sort of extreme diet or any of that stuff, which never works, by the way. Being mean to yourself never works in terms of reaching your goals. It just doesn't. Being kind to yourself is always so much more effective. So the first thing that we can do is just take a second and just notice what's happening, right? A lot of times we don't even give ourselves the space to do this. And so what you can do is just notice that you're feeling something, right? Just take a second and notice, okay, what am I feeling right now? And as I mentioned before, you know, emotion is something you're feeling in your body. So really try to identify and name what it is that you're feeling, right? Really pay attention to where in your body you're feeling it, what it feels like, and name the emotion. And this is really powerful because what you're doing is you're putting some space between you and the emotion, right? There's a big difference between saying, I am angry versus I am feeling anger, or I'm experiencing anger. Oh, or this is what anger is. Now you're creating a little bit of space between you and the emotion, and that allows you to start using your prefrontal cortex, the more evolved part of your brain that can think and plan and process, to figure out how to manage this, right? And so then once you've done that, now you can sort of process the emotion. And this is something that you can practice, but really what you're doing, it's kind of like a child that needs some attention, right? If you have a little kid that's constantly trying to get your attention and you're ignoring them, you know that that doesn't work. They're just going to follow you around and make more noise and, you know, bug you more until you finally turn around and say, okay, what do you need, right? And it's kind of the same thing with our emotion. It doesn't have to be this big, deep, heavy, like Freudian thing, but just kind of understanding, you know, why am I feeling this? What's going on? That alone sometimes can help that emotion to be felt all the way through and sort of dissipate out of our body, right? We're sort of holding on to the emotion because we're not giving it any attention. We're trying to avoid it with food instead of just turning around and being like, okay, what's going on here? I experienced this recently where I was doing a lot of emotional eating. I noticed I was eating a lot more sugar than I normally do. And I was doing sort of the traditional thing of like, just knock it off, like get your act together. Like, okay, Monday, we're going to stop eating all this sugar. And it wasn't working. It was almost making it worse. And so I finally had to kind of stop and go, okay, why? Like from a very compassionate place, what's going on, right? And I was able to look at some things that were going on that I had just been sort of so busy, I was sort of avoiding, and nothing deep and heavy, but just some things where I was now turning to food to kind of fuel myself through instead of really taking a look at the situation going, oh, you know, you have these new situations that are happening, which require more energy and more emotional maintenance, and we haven't really dealt with that. So that is a much better way to approach it, because now all of a sudden you're taking the power away from the food, taking the power away from the circumstance, and you're able to manage it more from what I call the adult brain, which is that prefrontal cortex, and really understand what's happening. So it can be helpful to write this down, but again, take a second to notice the emotion. How does it feel? Name the emotion, right? Kind of separate it from you, and then allow yourself to fully sort of process. Sometimes that means just sitting with it and feeling it. Sometimes it means kind of just understanding why you're feeling it. And then from there, you can try to decide what you're thinking about it and decide if you want to change your thinking. You can also then decide what you want to do. You might still decide to have the cookie, but I guarantee if you give yourself the space, you're going to consciously eat one cookie and enjoy it versus unconsciously emotionally eating, you know, the whole sleeve of cookies and then having all of that negative emotion on the other side of it, right? So it doesn't mean that you don't ever have any of this stuff ever again, but you're doing it from a much more controlled space and energy, and really a more compassionate place with yourself versus, again, trying to run away from the emotion. Okay, so that's really just a good starting point with how to manage your emotions. And what I want to say too is, you know, it is a process. It's not like this magical thing that just happens overnight. But if you can take a second to go through these steps, really identify what you're thinking, decide if you want to change your thinking, or if you just want to feel the emotion and process it through, then all of a sudden you're getting your power back. And now you can start to make decisions that are going to work for you and help you to slowly kind of overcome the emotional eating. Or it might happen very quickly. Some of my clients are like, oh, got it. I just never knew this before. Now that I've seen it explained this way, done, right? And they're able to make changes very, very quickly. And then other people, it's more of something that they practice for a while. But either way, I know that this works. I hope that you'll give it a try. I hope that you find this really helpful. I would love to hear from you. If you implement some of this stuff, please let me know how it goes for you. And if there's anything else that I can do, I do free strategy sessions and consultations. So please feel free to reach out to me, and we can jump on a phone call and talk about specifically what you're going through. I would love to do that. But either way, good luck with this. I hope it helps, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.